All right, so we've seen how to do things in JSX like embed variables and expressions. We've seen how to add conditional logic, do conditional rendering. Now we'll see how we can use loops to take an array, for example, and spit out a bunch of child components or a bunch of LIs or something like that. So the most common way of doing this is to use map. So in this example, we have an array of messages, and we're taking each message has an ID and text, and all we're doing is returning a UL. Inside of that, we're running some JavaScript using those curly braces, and we're doing a messages, or that array, .map. And for each message, M, we're creating an LI using m.text. So this is a very simple example, but this pattern shows up all the time. So some data.map, and then we're mapping it to often much more complex markup or other child components. So let me show you a working example of this. Okay, I'm working in a new directory called JSX loops. It's our same standard boilerplate. I should change this, I guess. I'm going to call this loops demo. And I have a friend component right now that just returns I am a friend, and then we have our app component that just returns an empty div. So what I'm going to do is call or create a new friend, but I'm going to pass in some data. So friend will have a name, and this first one will be Elton, and then we're going to have hobbies. Now hobbies is going to be an array, so we need to pass in JavaScript using those curly braces. I can't just do an array on its own. So hobbies will be, I don't know, piano, let's say singing and dancing. So now inside of our friend component, we have two props, name and hobbies. So the first thing I'm going to do inside of my render is do what I've shown you before, where we use object destructuring assignment. So I'm going to pull out those two props, which again are name and hobbies. So name comma hobbies equals this dot props. So now we just have two variables, name and hobbies. Each one has the corresponding prop in it. So I'm going to start by making an h1. Well, first I'm going to make a div. I'm going to return inside that div an h1 that just, let's do name. So I don't need this dot props dot name, just name. And then for hobbies, I want a list. So I want bullet points. So I'm going to do a UL, but then inside of that, I want an LI for each hobby. So it should say something like singing here, although not in caps. And then a second LI below for dancing. And if we should just make sure this is set up correctly. Let's open this with live server. Looks good. Now let's actually make it work. So rather than hard coding these LIs in, what we can do is use map, as we've already seen. So inside that UL, we're going to start with some JavaScript. We need our braces, and we're going to reference hobbies.map, and let's just call each one H. We could do whatever. Hobby, H is fine. Okay, and then what are we going to return for each one? Let's just do something simple. An LI, and inside that LI, we'll just put H, which is the individual hobby. So we are looping over this hobbies, which is coming from here. And for each one, we're mapping it to an LI that contains the hobby itself. Does it work? No. Why not? Well, what's happening here is that we are still inside of these braces, but we've also added in markup. And we need to escape this H. We need to make it clear we're not actually adding the letter H, because whatever I add here is what's going to show up. That's what we see. That's not how we want this to behave. So I want it to be dynamic, so we're going to put more braces inside. And now, does it work? Yes. Piano, singing, and dancing. Okay, so this is a really, really common thing that you'll see. If your markup is more complicated, if you have a lot more, like for example, if you're rendering other components, rather than an LI, we could easily have, we could have like a hobby component or hobby details or hobby list or something. What you will see some people do is make a variable up top, like we would just take this whole thing right here and say hobbies, let's do const, which I guess we're already doing hobbies up here. So let's do const LIs equals this whole thing. And then down here, we just put LIs, and that works too. But in this case, it's pretty short, so it's fine just to embed it. It's easy to understand. We know what it's doing. It makes it clear we're mapping to LIs. All right, and the last thing we can do is just make another friend. So we have Elton. Let's do Frida, and Frida likes drawing and painting. Let's just leave it at that. And there we go. We're getting LIs rendered for each hobby we pass in. So yes, it is trivial and silly, these examples, but this pattern is very important. This idea of mapping over something and creating markup based off of that content. This is something that comes up all the time in React.